All right, today we are unlocking the genetic code of one of history's most epic civilizations, ancient Egypt. For literally thousands of years, their secrets were sealed up in tombs. But now, science is finally reading the story written in their DNA. And believe me, the revelations are challenging just about everything we thought we knew.
So, get this. It all kicks off when scientists finally managed to extract DNA from a pharaoh who lived over 3,300 years ago. You'd think that would be the whole story, right? Well, the results weren't just unexpected. They basically ignited a massive firestorm of scientific and cultural controversy.
So, why? What was so controversial? Well, to really get it, we need to understand that long before we were sequencing DNA, our relationship with Egyptian mummies was, let's just say it was really bizarre. Here are 3 quick facts that kind of set the stage for the wild scientific challenges to come.
Okay, first up, before we were decoding dinosaur DNA, before Neanderthal genomes, the very first ancient DNA ever successfully extracted by scientists came from an Egyptian mummy way back in 1985. So, you see, Egypt has always been on the cutting edge of this science.
Second, and fair warning, this one's a little grim. For centuries, artists in Europe were using this really popular paint pigment called mummy brown. And yep, you guessed it, it was made from exactly what it sounds like, the ground-up remains of actual ancient Egyptian mummies.
And third, if you can believe it, it gets even weirder. From the 1400s all the way to the 1600s, this medicinal powder called mumia was a super popular remedy in Europe. It was prescribed for pretty much everything, and it was powdered mummy. So this long history of handling, grinding, and yes, even eating mummies is exactly what created this huge scientific challenge of getting clean, authentic DNA. Okay, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start with why getting ancient DNA is so hard in the first place. Then, we'll dive into Tutankhamun's controversial genetic code. After that, we'll look at the bigger picture of Egypt's genetic blueprint, talk about Cleopatra's ancestry, and wrap it all up with 3 big unanswered questions.
So let's kick things off with Section 1, the ancient DNA problem. Before we even get to the juicy results, we have to understand why, for the longest time, scientists thought getting this data was basically impossible.
You have to think of DNA as this incredibly fragile molecule. And in Egypt, it had 5 mortal enemies. You've got the searing desert heat that just shatters it. You have high humidity inside the tombs, which makes it decay faster. Then you have the very chemicals used for mummification. Turns out, they destroy genetic material. And if that wasn't enough, you've got contamination from soil microbes and, of course, every single modern human who ever touched them.
So how on earth did scientists get past all that? Well, the breakthrough really came down to 3 key steps. First, they stopped looking for perfect, complete strands and instead focused on isolating tiny, broken-up DNA fragments. Second, they used something called high-throughput sequencing, which lets them analyze millions of these fragments all at once. And third, and this is the really clever part, they learned how to prove the DNA was ancient by looking for specific chemical damage patterns that only happen over thousands of years. It's like a genetic fingerprint that screams, "I'm ancient," not modern contamination.
All right, Section 2, Tutankhamun's controversial code. This brings us to the famous boy king, and a massive controversy sparked by a 2010 study, a TV show, and the huge scientific debate that blew up right after. Okay, quick science definition before we dive in. I promise it's painless. We're going to talk about something called a Y-DNA haplogroup. The easiest way to think about it is like a major branch on the male side of the human family tree. It gets passed down from father to son, and it can trace that paternal line way back to a general part of the world.
So the whole firestorm started with a claim made in a TV documentary connected to that 2010 study. It announced that King Tut belonged to haplogroup R1b. And this was a bombshell, because R1b is the single most common haplogroup in Western European men today.
But whoa, the scientific community hit the brakes hard. And here's why. That R1b finding, it was never actually published in the official peer-reviewed paper, it only showed up on TV. The analysis used less reliable genetic markers, they didn't rule out the super high risk of contamination from modern European researchers, and the biggest red flag of all, the raw genetic data has never been released for other scientists to check. And in science, if it can't be verified by others, it's not a fact. Okay, Section 3, Egypt's genetic blueprint. So after all that debate over King Tut, the science took a massive leap forward in 2017. This is when the first complete ancient Egyptian genomes were finally published.
This was a huge study.
They analyzed DNA from 90 different mummies from a place called Abusir el-Meleq. And look at this timeline. It spanned 1,300 years, all the way from the New Kingdom through Alexander the Great's conquest and deep into the Roman period. This gave scientists this incredible window to see how the genetics of the population might have changed over time.
So, what did they find? Well, here's the kicker. The study showed that these ancient Egyptians were not most closely related to modern Egyptians. Turns out their closest genetic relatives were ancient people from the Near East, what we'd now call the Levant, and from Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey. And what's really wild is that this genetic profile stayed remarkably consistent for that entire 1,300 years, even after being conquered by Greeks and Romans.
Now, when they compared that ancient DNA to people living in Egypt today, another huge finding popped out. Modern Egyptians share about 8% more of their ancestry with sub-Saharan African populations than the ancient people in this study did. This tells us that the genetic story of Egypt kept evolving. It was a crossroads of cultures long after the pharaohs, and there was a really significant increase in gene flow from south of the Sahara that happened after the Roman period.
Section 4. Cleopatra and Ancient Diversity. This, of course, brings us to maybe the most famous ruler of them all. What does all the evidence actually say about the ancestry of Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt?
Let's just start with the mainstream scholarly view, which is summed up perfectly by the historian Michael Grant, who said, Cleopatra probably had not a drop of Egyptian blood and would have described herself as Greek. And the reason is simple. She wasn't from an ancient Egyptian family line. She was a member of the Ptolemaic dynasty, which came from Macedonia and was Greek.
So let's break this down. The scholarly consensus, which is based on historical records, points to her family being Macedonian Greek, with a little Persian and Sogdian, that's ancient Iranian, ancestry mixed in. Other popular claims just aren't backed up by the evidence. For instance, the North African claim was based on a skeleton that was misidentified as her sister Arsinoe, and that identification has been widely rejected by scholars.
But hey, the ancestry of one ruler is only one tiny piece of the puzzle. The society that Cleopatra actually ruled over was undeniably multicultural, and you can literally see it in the famous Pharaoh mummy portraits from Roman Egypt. I mean, just look at them. They show people with this incredible blend of Egyptian, Greek, and Roman influences, a literal picture of this cosmopolitan society.
Section 5. 3 Unanswered Questions. Now, for all that we've learned, the story of Egypt's DNA is far from finished. There are still some huge mysteries that science is dying to solve.
So, what's next on the horizon? Well, here are 3 of the biggest genetic questions left. First, can we finally, once and for all, verify the true Y-DNA of King Tut's royal family? Second, can DNA tell us who the mothers and grandmothers in Cleopatra's family were? They're often total blanks in the historical records. And finally, the really big one, can we eventually create a complete genetic map of ancient Egypt, covering its entire 3,000-year history?
Which leaves us with one final question for you. Knowing that ancient Egypt was this incredible genetic crossroads, connected to the Near East, to sub-Saharan Africa, and to the Greek and Roman world, does that change how you see their civilization? Let us know what you think.